Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook Live today. Thank you so much to everyone in our audience joining us for this interesting session, not a boring session. We'll be talking about breathing new life into your boring ancestors, although, as I discussed with our speaker, Melissa Barker, earlier, there really is no such thing as a boring ancestor, which we will all find out shortly when we see her presentation. So we're so excited about this presentation. It's sure to breathe a lot of life into all of our ancestors, and we can't wait. So thank you everyone who's joining us from near and from far. I see Anne from Knoxville, Tennessee. We have Joanne from Ontario, Canada. Let's see, we have David from Pennsylvania. Thank you everyone for tuning in and letting us know where you're joining us from tonight, today, this morning, this afternoon, this evening, depending on where you're located. I see Maria wrote, I love the title, Melissa, as do I. We were commenting that it's really a great title, and we are so thrilled about this session. So thank you everyone for tuning in. So great to see you all here in the audience with us today. We have a lot going on at MyHeritage, as always. We recently released our second episode of the MyHeritage podcast, Blast from My Past. So our podcast is available on all podcast streaming services, Spotify or Apple Podcasts. So we hope that you will check it out. The new episode is episode number 2. Called The Missing Piece. It's really an incredibly moving story. Really, all the episodes of Blast from My Past, our new podcast, are just so moving and inspiring and just so touching. So we hope that you will check out that new podcast episode. We'll put a link in the comments section so that you can check it out. And you stay tuned because there's many more episodes of our podcast, Blast from My Past, coming up. We'll be coming out with a podcast every couple weeks, a new episode, and be sure to listen. And it's a great way of hearing some new family history stories that you might not have heard before and inspire you in your own family history research. So make sure to check that out. In addition, we recently came out with a feature called Live Story, where you can make your ancestors speak. You can plug in a photo of an ancestor with some text, whether it be directly automatically from your family tree on MyHeritage with information about their life, or if you'd like to put some original text in yourself about them and have your ancestors' photos speak. It's really an incredible tool, a lot of fun to use, and it can be also very moving and touching to those who knew these ancestors or who never got a chance to meet them and are now able to hear them tell their own story. So it's really an incredible feature. You can also learn more about that on the MyHeritage blog, blog.myheritage.com. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. We have with us Melissa Barker. She is a certified archives manager and public historian. She works at the Houston County, Tennessee Archives, and she's affectionately known by everyone in the genealogy community as the Archive Lady. She's been doing family history for over 30 years, and it's always such a pleasure to have her on our show. She's spoken about many topics before, but this one I'm really excited about because I feel like I could learn so much about breathing life into my ancestors in my family tree, the ones that I don't know too much about. So let's bring her on here to say hello to all of us today. Here we go. Hello, Melissa.
Hello, Esther. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
Doing well. Coming to you from the Houston County, Tennessee Archives, where we have lots of historical and genealogical records. And today we're going to talk about breathing new life into your boring ancestors. And as Esther said, there is no such thing as a boring ancestor. So let's get started and find out how we can breathe new life into our ancestors.
Sure. Yeah. And just to let everyone know that we'll do a giveaway as well for today's show. So before we get started, those of you in the audience that have had an ancestor that you didn't know too much about and then found an important clue or a piece of information about them on MyHeritage, let us know in the comments section and you'll be entered for a draw to win a MyHeritage DNA kit today at the end of today's show. So just put that in the comments section throughout, and we hope to hear from all of you. And of course, if you have questions for Melissa at any point of time, please let us know in the comments as well. So let me bring your slides up, and you can get started.
Wonderful. Are you seeing them?
One moment. There we go. Great.
Okay, are we ready to go?
All set.
Thank you, Esther. And thank you for MyHeritage, because I love the fact that I can share my expertise, but also share my love of genealogy. I've been doing genealogy for 32 years, and I research anybody and everybody that is in my family or connected to my family. And so today we're going to talk about breathing new life into your boring ancestors. And like we said, there is really no such thing as a boring ancestor. I'm sure many of you have found some fantastic stories about your ancestors, but I also know that I find that genealogists maybe hit a roadblock, or maybe they just can't find very many records about their ancestors, so they have a difficult time telling the story of their ancestors. So I'm going to show you some techniques today, one specific technique, and I'm going to show you a bunch of records. As an archivist, that's what I'm all about, is the records. And there is archives out there everywhere. And I like to say that there's an archives for everything, but they are just chock full of wonderful records wherever they're located. So one of the ways that I encourage myself, into getting my ancestors new life and breathing new life into their story is timelines. It may be a very simple trick to use, but it's one that I use for all of my ancestors. And I don't know why, but it just gets me excited being able to fill in something into their timeline. And then it makes me excited to want to find something else. So you're going to see me use a timeline throughout this presentation with one of my husband's ancestors, along with the records. So a timeline, if you don't know, is a listing of life events arranged in chronological order. Pretty simple. You take the records that you find, the information that you find, and you plug it into this timeline. You can do a timeline on your computer with a Word document. You can do a timeline with pencil and paper. However you choose to do a timeline, I think it's a great visual to show us our ancestors' story year by year. And I'm a visual learner, and so timelines really help me to envision and to see the information and the story develop right before my eyes. So normally a timeline starts with the birth of the person, and then it will end with their death. Now you see in parentheses, I have some exceptions. Sometimes after they die, they have probate, they have an estate, they have things that happen maybe not to them, but to their estate or to things about them. And so sometimes we want to put those on our timelines as well. Timelines will include vital information such as birth, marriage, and death dates. That's pretty basic. That's something we want to plug into our timeline first and foremost. And then you want to add in something for each of the years that they were alive. A timeline could include any event in that person's life, whatever it may be. One of the things that I try to do with my timelines and with my ancestors is I do their timeline from the year of their birth to the year of their death. And then I put in those years in between. And then I try to find any kind of piece of information to document each and every year that they've been on this earth. Now, I have not been able to complete an entire timeline for anyone in my family, my ancestors, but I'm still looking for records to do that. Also, don't forget that timelines could include historical events that happened to the person or that the person experienced. Or if they didn't, you don't have any records or information about that event from them personally, maybe you can include some historical events that happened around them that maybe you don't know how it affected them, but you know that they lived through them. That really puts our ancestors into perspective from their particular era that they lived. And so I like to do that for my ancestors as well. So we're going to use Jesse Glasgow, who is my husband's third great grandfather, for an example for this presentation. This is his basic timeline. It starts with his birth, and it has census records, and then it has his death. Now, the red one there is one of the first things I found about him. He ran for Tennessee House of Representatives in 1865. Now, how did I find this piece of information? One of the databases that I use is Google Books. Google Books is fantastic. And so I was just put his name in, plugged it in, did a search, and I found these wonderful Tennessee state records that showed that he ran for Tennessee House of Representatives. And the record itself actually had really nothing to do with Jesse Glasgow. What it had to do with is a lawsuit by the top two people who were running in the election. There was a contested election, and so they did an investigation. While doing that investigation, they had to gather all of the election results. When they did that, Jesse Glasgow was part of those election results. He actually received 4 votes. He obviously didn't win, but he was part of that investigation because of the election results. So I was able to put that into his timeline. Now, the census information you can get on MyHeritage. I found this census information on MyHeritage. And then we go from this basic timeline, and as we find records and information, we add to it. Between the census, now we know April 1st, the 1950 U.S. Census, population census is coming out. We are all so very excited. But between the census, a lot can happen. There are census records we consider basic record groups in genealogy. When I start researching a new ancestor or one that I haven't ever researched before, the first thing I do is I go out and I get census records for every year that they have been alive. That's one of the first things that I do. And so the U.S. federal population census was taken every 10 years, starting in 1790. So that gives us a lot of census records to be able to gather for our basic timeline. This is the 1840 Davidson County, Tennessee, U.S. Federal Population Schedule Census for Jesse Glasgow. Now, Davidson County is where Nashville, Tennessee is. And so you see them there with the red arrow. This is just the first page. Remember now, the 1940 census has 2 pages, but I'm only showing the first page. And so it shows him listed, and it does not list every family member. As you know, that not until the 1850 census does it list every family member, but it lists Jesse Glasgow as the head of household, and then it represents with tick marks each and every person that was in the family. Again, a lot can happen in 10 years. I have found information where someone was born and a child, and it died within those 10 years. And if I hadn't looked for other records in those 10 years, I would never have known that. So there is a lot that can happen in those 10 years. And that's why it's important that when you're researching your ancestors, that you don't just leave those voided 10 years in between the census alone. We need to be looking for records to fill in those 10-year gaps. Again, there are numerous record sources that can be looked at, found in archives, libraries, historical societies, genealogical societies that can help you fill in those gaps of information to your ancestors' timeline. Like I said, one of my favorite things is when I can add something to my ancestors' timeline. So what kind of records do we want to look for to add to our timeline? Well, I can't go over every single record that can be out there because there's just so many, but I thought I would choose some that might help us. One type of record that is something that is done every single year are tax records. You know yourself, if you have to pay taxes, you've got to pay your taxes every single year. Well, what better way to fill in that timeline like we're trying to do than using tax records? And so these are land taxes that are usually collected every single year. Now, if your ancestors did not own property, maybe they lived in the United States and they had to pay a poll tax. A poll tax was something that someone had to pay in order to be able to vote. And so just because they didn't own property doesn't mean that they weren't listed in the tax records. So don't forget that one. This is actually an 1885 tax receipt where Jesse Glasgow paid his taxes. And so I was able to find this document and then add it to his timeline for that year. And notice it's in between the census years. So it was something that I could add. Another type of record you could look for are property records. These will happen all the time when your ancestors bought land, sold land, or were deeded as a gift land. So even if you think your ancestors didn't have money to purchase property, maybe they were deeded property by a family member, which means they were given the property. So look in those deed records and property records anyway, even if you think that your ancestors didn't have the money to own property. Again, this is a type of record that you can find in between that 10-year time span between the census that will help you fill in your timeline and help to tell your ancestor story. So this is a deed dated March the 10th, 1881 for Jesse Glasgow, who was purchasing property from J.S. Lee. The property he purchased actually is not too far from where I live. And so it's great to find these kinds of documents because then you start adding to your ancestor's story. And it's not just, well, he was born, he lived during these census, and he died, and that's it. No, you have all of these other great information that you can add. Now, we all look for those birth, marriage, and death records. Those are pretty basic. Those are called vital records. And so looking for a birth record, a marriage record, or a death record can also happen in between those census years. Now, his birth information, there are no birth records for 1816. And so I've had to look for other records that list when he was born. But this document that you see here is his marriage record. He married in Davidson County to Hannah Boyd, and he married September 2nd, 1835. This particular marriage record is actually a copy that was made years after their marriage. It's not actually an original, but it is the marriage record. This is the only one that exists, and so this is the one that I got. And I added their marriage to his timeline. And I also added the marriage to Hannah Boyd's timeline because she is my husband's third great-grandmother. Court records. Now, don't think court records that you don't need to look in them because my ancestor didn't commit a crime. There are many other reasons why someone would have to go to court. Maybe because there was a civil suit. Maybe they had a dispute with their neighbor on boundary lines. So that would be in civil court. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something criminal. This particular document is a guardian bond. Jesse Glasgow's daughter and son-in-law both passed away within a couple of years of each other, and that left their children without any parents. And so in 1892, which is only about a year before Jesse died, he was the guardian, appointed guardian of his own grandchildren, the Harris children. And as you can see down there, there is actually his own signature on this document. A lot of times you'll see an X, or you'll see a signature that looks like the same writing on the whole document that may have been written by a clerk. But in this case, this is actually his signature. And so not only do I have this wonderful document, but now I have his signature. And it's something I can add to his timeline. And so now I know that he was in the census records, and there came a time when he had to take care of his grandchildren. Another type of record that can produce a lot of information for your ancestors are school records. And so these types of records are generated usually on a yearly basis as well. We attend school every single year until we graduate. So these are records you might look for each and every year of your ancestor's life. Now, it might be harder to find these records in some areas because it all depends on what was saved, what was preserved. Many school systems didn't save a lot of records, only what they had to. And so it may be difficult to find, but don't let that deter you. As an archivist, I can tell you that we have these kinds of records in our archives. They may not be digitized, they may not be on microfilm, they may not even be online, but we have them in our archives, and so we need to be working with those archives. I'll also give you a little bit of a tip too about your ancestors that maybe didn't go to school or only went to school for maybe a few years. They could be in school records as well. Um, Jesse Glasgow, from what I understand from my research, did only went to school up to like the 6th grade. But yet I have found records for him in the local school records because he was involved with education. After researching him for 32 years, I've come to know him as being a big supporter of education. I believe, have not been able to 100% prove it, but I believe he actually paid for his grandson to go to medical school at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, because his father, his Jesse's son, his grandson's father, died during the Civil War. So I believe he helped his grandson go to medical school. This particular document is actually a receipt, a simple receipt. But what's a receipt for is that he paid $5 for a subscription to and 1 share of the Cumberland City Academy. So he was purchasing a share in this Cumberland City Academy dated 1891. So if you have ancestors that didn't go to school or only went to school for a few years, still check those school records. Check the school board minute books. This is where you're probably going to most likely find them. They're going to be listed in there as those that were hired to chop wood for the one-room schoolhouse. Or maybe they delivered coal to the schoolhouse. Maybe they had a beef with the school system and they took it to the school board. Looking and reading through those school board minute books are phenomenal. They have such wonderful information, not only about students, teachers, the actual schools in the area, but you might find your ancestor in there that you can add information to their timeline, which is also adding information to their story. So after showing you those documents, here is Jesse Glasgow's timeline, and look how it has grown. We've added that marriage in 1835. We added the deed that he bought property from J.S. Lee. He also, that receipt from 1885 where he paid taxes. The 1 share for $5 that I just showed you for the Cumberland City Academy, and then the guardian appointment for his grandchildren in 1892. And so see how this adds to a timeline. And then once I find a piece of information and I add it to my timeline, it makes me want to go find more. And it also adds to his story. It tells me he bought property, he paid his taxes, he was interested in education by purchasing a share in the Cumberland City Academy, and he was there for his grandchildren. So his story is getting to be bigger, it's getting to be more interesting, and definitely not boring. So why look in an archive for these records? Archives, I'm asked all the time, what exactly is an archive? Well, anywhere where records are being stored, preserved, shared with the public, saved, that's an archive. They don't have to have the word archive on the building or the name archive in their name. If they have these records, they are an archive. And so it could be an archives like where I work, a county archive. It could be your local public library. Maybe your local historical society or genealogical society has records. And don't forget those university and college archives and libraries. And also museums. You think about a museum. You walk into a museum, they have displays and exhibits that have old letters, they have photographs, they have scrapbooks and diaries on display. Well, they also have more of that in their back rooms. So they are a type of archive as well. One thing about our records, genealogical records, they're not all online and they're not even all microfilmed, but they're there. And so once we've scoured the internet, we really need to start picking up the telephone, getting on the computer, sending those emails to these places and talk to them about the records that they have. Many of us are not able to travel, and I get that. We may not be able to go to the places where our ancestors lived, but we can get on the phone and we can send emails and we can contact them through social media. We can talk to them about their records, talk to them about our research, and get a lot of research done that way. I've lived in Tennessee for 34 years. All my ancestors are from West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and I've been able to do a lot of research from Tennessee by just sending emails, letters, phone calls, and things like that. So don't let you not being able to travel deter you. So archives receive records donations almost on a daily basis. These come from individuals, these come from groups like clubs, social clubs, civic clubs, and even local businesses that have gone out of business. And so these collections of records could include your ancestor. So this is an example. This is the Lyle Family Records collection that was donated to our archives. And if you look at this picture, it literally has a little bit of everything. There's a store ledger book, there's a scrapbook, there's newspaper clippings, there's programs, there's advertisements, photographs, literally everything. None of this is online anywhere, but yet it's open for research at a local archive. So if you're researching the Lyle family from this area in Houston County, Tennessee, these records may be of interest to you. Maybe they will list your ancestor. Most archives, of course, understand the importance of historical and genealogical records. We maintain our facilities and we collect these records. We're constantly asking people when they clean up their attic and their basement, their outside buildings, that if you come across any kind of records, photographs, artifacts, to please consider donating them, because then they get processed properly in archival materials and they get open to the public. One of the things that I like to do is when I'm working in a particular area where my ancestors lived, I talk to these archives and these places that have these records. And then I periodically ask them, have you received anything new? Has anybody donated anything that maybe I haven't seen yet? And so always check back. Even if you've done research there many times, maybe something's been donated recently that would include your ancestor. Here's just a photograph of the back rooms of the archives here where I work. When you go to do research at a particular place, you may find that you don't see this kind of stuff in the research room because they're usually in back rooms. They're in temperature controlled areas, and you usually have to request the information from the archivist. They go get it, they bring it to you to do research in. But the point is that these records are sitting on shelves waiting on us as genealogists to find them, because these boxes of records contain the story of our ancestors, and that's what we're trying to find. Another reason why we need to look at an archive is because it also helps us to do a reasonably exhaustive search. And so if you're going to do that, archives really must be on your to-do list. And what is a reasonably exhaustive search? Well, from Evidence Explained, this is a book by Elizabeth Shawn Mills from 2017. The definition of that is requiring thorough use of all known records relevant to the research problem and application of all appropriate methodology. Essentially, what this means is that your research will never be done. I've had a couple of genealogists in my time tell me, well, I've done all my research, it's complete, I found everything I need to find, and I'm done. Well, I don't know about you, but I've been doing this for 32 years, and I don't think I will ever be done with my genealogy research. There is always more information to find. There's always a new ancestor or relative to find. And so I don't think I'm ever going to get done. But what we do need to do is we need to research, and we need to look in every avenue, look under every rock, or go to every archive that we can to find the information we're looking for. So what are some unique records in an archive? And when I say unique records, a lot of times these records are the ones that either genealogists don't think about, they don't even maybe even know about them, or maybe they don't even know how to find them or use them. And so unique records are those ones that I love doing research in. These are the ones that I seek out. They're not those basic census or vital records. They're the ones that are going to tell me the real story about my ancestors. We have some of the most unique records in our collections at an archive. Many of our archives, especially nowadays, are really striving to put a lot of the records collections online. They are partnering with places like MyHeritage to get their records collections online. There's vast amounts of records out there, and our archives are understanding that they need to get as much online as possible. Now, with that said, I'll still tell you that a lot of what's in our archives probably will never get online. So that's why it's important for us to work with these archives to dig through and see what they might have. Here's an example of something that I think is unique, probably because it probably normally would have been thrown away at the time. But this is actually a post office receipt. Now, you think about yourself when you go to the post office and you pay to mail a letter or a package, and you might get a receipt for that payment. Well, you just throw the receipt in your purse, or you throw it in your glove box of your car, or just throw it in the trash on the way outside the post office. This one got saved. And so it's dated May 26, 1883. And it's where Jesse Glasgow sent a letter to his son, George Washington Glasgow. What a wonderful, unique document that most likely would have gotten thrown away, but it was actually saved for all of these years. So this is something I can add to his timeline. But then again, it makes me wonder what's in that letter, because I don't have the letter. And here it is on his timeline for 1883. I didn't have anything between 1881 and 1885, but now I can put 1883 that he mailed a letter to his son, George Washington Glasgow. So what does that mean in the grand scale of things? Well, in actuality, it means that I know that George Washington was living at that time, George Washington Glasgow. That helps me to know that if I didn't know when he died. And I also know that Jesse Glasgow was literate because he mailed a letter. So there's lots of things we can learn about each and every piece that we put on our timeline. So vertical files are also a fantastic place to find records. If you don't know what vertical files are, sometimes they're called subject files, and in a few archives I've actually seen them called morgue files. Vertical files may be those records that are in file folders and filing cabinets. I've seen a lot of archives take and put all of their newspaper clippings in such a collection. But you can find unique and one-of-a-kind documents in vertical files. They are literally a hodgepodge of records that are collected by surname or subject name. That's how they're going to be filed. The archivist or historical society member, whoever you're doing research, should have an index for you that will list all the surnames, all the subject names. And when I say subject names, I mean it could be the name of a store or a church or a school, things like that. And so that should have an index for you to look at so you know what you need to look at, have pulled. They're arranged by file folders and then in filing cabinets, just like this one. These are in our archives here. And like I said, they could literally have a file folder for just about anything. I've gone to archives and requested files from vertical files, and when I open them up, it's amazing what you can find in there. All different kinds of records. Again, they're stored in filing cabinets. You're not going to see these in the research area where you're usually sitting. Like I said, they'll be in the back rooms. You'll have to request these records. But I would suggest that you ask the archivist about them when you go do research. Here is a photograph of the vertical files in the Houston County, Tennessee archives. We actually have 4 cabinets now. That's one thing about vertical files, is that they're constantly growing, because we have people come in all the time with 1 or 2, 3, 4 pieces of paper of documentation of some kind, and they just donate it. And so that doesn't make a large collection, so we put them in vertical files. And also, as we're going through records, we may find things that just will fit in our vertical file collection. So it's important that you look at that index for your surnames. This is a document that I found for Jesse Glasgow in a vertical file. This is actually, for all intents and purposes, this is his homeowner's policy. If you own a home, you have insurance on your home, this is what this is. And so there at the bottom, it lists how much he is insured for on his house, and it describes his house. And then it also shows how much he's insured for his contents, what is included in his home, and then it lists a few of his contents. This is from 1893. And so it was saved. Why it was saved, I don't know. There's some damage to the document, but it was saved. And I can add this to his timeline, but more importantly, it gives me a little bit more of an insight into who he was, what he owned, how he lived with this one document. Manuscript collections. I love manuscript collections. I find either genealogists know about them and love them, or they really don't know much about them or intimidated by them. So when I'm asked about how to describe a manuscript collection, this is how I describe that. Think about all the genealogical records that you have in your possession, all the census records, you have photographs, you've got original records, maybe you've got a scrapbook or a diary, maybe you've got grandma's quilt or the family Bible, all of those things, put them in boxes. Go down to your car, put those boxes in your car, drive down to the local archive, and just donate them, hand them over. That is what a manuscript collection is. So that tells you it literally could be anything. So these are a collection of normally personal papers, family papers, maybe they're business records, civic club records, social club records. Anything could be a manuscript collection. Manuscript collections could contain one box of records in a collection, or it could be 100 or 200 boxes of records in a collection. So the size of each collection could vary. But researching in these collections, I think, is a must for genealogists. I have found more information for my ancestors in manuscript collections than I have really in any other collection. And a lot of times you're going to find a lot of original records in these collections. Now, most of these collections, if not all of these collections, are donated. And so people out there have to be willing to donate them to the archive. And again, I think these are probably the most underused collections in the genealogy community. And every chance I get, I'm always talking about them. This is an example of a manuscript collection, one that's been processed. This is our Irish Celebration collection at the Houston County, Tennessee Archives. Every year since 1963, we have an Irish celebration. We just had it last week, actually. It's the third weekend in March. We celebrate the Irish here because the Irish railroad workers came through here in the 1850s building the railroad. And while they were here, they saw the terrain of our area, thought it reminded them of Ireland, and so they named our capital city Erin. And today it's still called that. So we celebrate them every year, and we just celebrated our 60th Irish celebration. So these records collections are very well organized and cataloged. The finding aid is what you'll need to look at. Now, the finding aid is a document that is produced by the archivist as they process the collection. When I say processed, I mean they are cleaning the records, they're flattening the records, they're taking staples out, putting them in folders, and then neatly putting them in boxes, and then creating the finding aid. The finding aid is like a roadmap to the collection. It will help you to understand what is exactly in that collection. Most importantly, you want to read the contents listing. The contents listing will tell you the box by box, folder by folder listing of what's in the collection. Again, you're not going to see these when you go into an archive. They're going to be in the back rooms. They should have an index of finding aids that you can look at and help to decide what collections might be helpful to you. And then you'll probably have to request for those collections to be brought to you. Here is a photograph of a neighboring archives, the photo I took several years ago. This is the Dickson County, Tennessee Archives. This is what we call in the archives world the stacks. As you can see, the boxes on the shelves. Every single box you see on those shelves, nothing in those boxes are online or microfilmed. They're there at the archives for researchers to come and do research. And these are manuscript collections. This is how we store them. And so they have an index of their finding aids that you can see what kind of collections they have. And here's a document that I found in one of those boxes. This is actually another receipt. Again, something else that probably would have gotten thrown away, but for some reason it has survived. Dated June 24th, 1889 for Jesse Glasgow. And he got a subscription to a newspaper. He got a subscription to the National Tribune. And so that, again, it tells me he was literate. He could read. He was interested in national affairs. This is a Washington, D.C. newspaper. So it's not just a local newspaper. And he received the newspaper. He would have received it through the mail. And so very great information that I can add to his timeline. Loose records. I love loose records. If you don't know what those are, These are accompanying papers or additional papers that go with any of the bound volumes of records. These are records that would be associated with bound volumes such as court records, probate records. You may have heard the term probate packets or court packets, same thing as loose records. And this is where you're going to find all the details of a particular court case or the details of a particular probate case. Here's a great example of that. This was a surprise to me as I was processing records in our archives. This is a court case from 1952 for Mr. William Hughes. The state of Tennessee was charging Mr. Hughes with going armed with a razor. Now, all of these documents you see here were actually tri-folded and put into that envelope that you see there on the left. So when I pulled these documents out and I flattened them, I thought, wait a minute, at it, and I was very excited because anytime we went across something so unique as this, it's very exciting in the archives. And so we still have it all archived together. But this is additional paperwork to what is mentioned in the bound court volume minute books. And so when you're doing research, you find a court case in a bound volume, ask the archivist if they have any loose documents, any loose packets that accompany that court case. Same thing with the probate case. And I can tell you that that razor is still, after all these years, very sharp. These are going to be organized and archived separately from the bound volumes. You see this book here. Many of us have been worked in these kind of bound volumes before. These records are going to be in boxes and in file folders separate from the bound volumes. They're going to be additional documents and information that go with the information you find in the bound volumes. Some examples of loose records could be loose marriage records, loose court records, loose probate records. And something else that I'll tell you about is when you find something in a bound volume, let's say you find a court case, you find a marriage record or a probate, a last will and testament. If there are loose records associated with those bound volumes, you may very well find additional information that you did not find in the bound volume. That's why it's important that we look for those loose records, because you're going to get more of the story for your timeline and to tell your ancestor story. So this is considered a loose record. This is Jesse Glasgow's Civil War Pension Increase Certificate dated March the 3rd, 1883. He fought with the 83rd Illinois, which is a Union regiment. He applied for a pension, received a pension, but then later on he actually asked for an increase in his pension. And so this is an original record that I was able to find. Scrapbooks. This is another I consider unique record source in an archive because scrapbooks are unique. They are put together by individuals, and all of us are different. All of us are unique in our own ways. And we would, if we were given the chance, I think each of us would put together a different scrapbook. And I just love scrapbooks. All kinds of wonderful things can be found in them. These are personal books. They're filled with various documents. I've seen original photographs pasted in scrapbooks, memorabilia. I've actually seen original vital records, such as birth records, death certificates, marriage certificates. Scrapbooks are wonderful. This is just a photograph of a few of the scrapbooks that we have in the archives. Scrapbooks come in many types. Maybe you've seen a scrapbook that has nothing but newspaper clippings in it. I've seen where some people take and do a scrapbook on a particular subject matter, such as a war. Maybe they were on the home front and they clipped out all of the stuff out of the newspaper about the war at the time and put it in a scrapbook. You're going to probably find these in manuscript collections with individual collections. I've also seen archivists sometimes take all of their scrapbooks that they have and put them in one collection. So always great to ask the archivist, do you have any scrapbooks? Scrapbooks could contain documents that are unique and are rarely seen. In other words, you may not find them in any other record source. And so it's important for us to look for those. This is a document that I found in a scrapbook. This one actually made me go down a rabbit hole a little bit. This is a Louisiana state lottery ticket from 1888. First of all, I didn't even know there was a lottery in 1888. And then I thought to myself, Jesse Glasgow lived in Tennessee his entire life. When did he ever go to Louisiana to purchase a lottery ticket? Well, after I did some research, I found that the Louisiana lottery would advertise in newspapers all across the country. And so the newspaper where Jesse Lesko lived ran those advertisements. And what you could do is you could go down to the local post office and purchase your lottery ticket through the post office. So that's what he did. And so you see the number there at the bottom, 92074. That was his lottery ticket number. So also the newspapers printed the winning lottery numbers. So I've been looking for the lottery numbers, and so far I've not found where he won. But what a wonderful piece of information to be able to add to his life story, to his timeline. I mean, who else out there did you know that has purchased the Louisiana lottery ticket in 1888? So fantastic piece of information. Some scrapbooks have journaling in them. Some people would like to paste things in their scrapbook, and then they will write out beside of it when they got it, what was the story. Those are fantastic to find those because they explain why they pasted what they did in their scrapbook. Before I leave scrapbooks, I'll say this. If you can't find scrapbooks for your ancestors at an archive, look at the scrapbooks for others in the community. Maybe they clipped things out of the newspaper that talk about your ancestors, or maybe they, in their journaling, in their scrapbook, they mention being with your ancestor at an event or saying something about your ancestor. So always look for those other documents and scrapbooks, diaries, things like that for others in the community because they may just mention your ancestors. Old letters and diaries, another great record source to find information about your ancestors and also to get more of an understanding of their lives and what they did on a day-to-day basis. They can be a wealth of information if you can have them or find them. Unfortunately, my family did not leave old letters and diaries for me. I wish they had, but I'm constantly looking for their neighbors who maybe wrote about them in their diaries or something like that. So these are personal records. They're going to get donated to an archive if they get to the archive. If you have old letters and diaries in your possession for your family history, and they mention others in the community, consider making copies if you'd like, donating them to an archive so that that genealogist that's looking for that information about those people that are mentioned in those letters and diaries can find that information. These are some old letters for Mary Stockard. Her sons were in World War II, and so they wrote letters to her, and these are those letters. As you can see, letters come in all shapes and sizes, all different kinds of stationery. And so Mary Stockard actually received these letters from her sons when they were in World War II. You're going to find these usually in manuscript collections because they're going to be donated with the entire collection. You're going to see in the finding aid that they're going to be listed as correspondence normally or letters, and then they'll give a date range of what they have available in the collection. Old letters and diaries can give you first-hand account of family history, which you usually can't find in any other record source. So if you have old letters or diaries or can find them in an archive, what a fantastic way to get more information about your ancestors' life story, add information to your timeline, and to show you that your ancestors truly are not boring. They did live lives, they did things, they experienced things, they have emotions, and so that's something we need to document. A lot of our old letters and diaries report or talk about births, marriages, and deaths, even when the vital records themselves don't even exist. I have seen old letters and diaries that talked about new births in the family, and at that time, there are no official birth records that were being produced at that time. So what a great piece of information to be able to document that birth. Here is an example. This is a postcard from Almeda Ann Glasgow Burcham, dated for June 14th, 1886. This is Jesse's daughter. This is actually my husband's direct ancestor from Jesse. And she wrote a postcard to her father. Her spelling's atrocious and her handwriting is really bad. But she's talking about day-to-day business. She's talking about a court thing. She's talking about different business type things. And she signed it. So I have her signature as well. This is to her father. It was going to be a personal thing, but it was saved. And it has some pieces of information that I can glean out of it and add to not only Jesse's story, but now Almeda Ann's story. And so, see, just one document can add so much to a family history. And here we are back to Jesse Glasgow's timeline. We have added the Civil War pension increase document from 1883, the postcard I just showed you for Almeda Ann in 1886, the Louisiana lottery ticket in 1888, that subscription to that newspaper that he got in 1889, and his home insurance document for 1890. Now look at his timeline. We've gone from his birth date and his death date and a few census records to all this other information. And if you take this timeline and all this information that's in it and you turn that into a narrative or a story, you can see the story that you can tell. Tell your ancestor's story. It's important as genealogists that if you're like me and you take it very seriously, that I want to know everything there is to know about my ancestors. I want to know what they had for breakfast. I want to know what their hobbies were. I want to know about things like, did they purchase a newspaper? Did they get a lottery ticket? Things like that. It really brings our ancestors to life to us. So using resources available at various archives will help us fill in those gaps in our ancestors' timeline. I don't think we should settle for just the birth, marriage, and death dates and move on. Our ancestors lived their lives. We're here because our ancestors came before us. So why not tell their story? And tell their story whether it's good, bad, or ugly. It's their story, and we should tell it. So thank you very much for attending this presentation. Please visit my blog, A Genealogist in the Archives. You can also find me on Facebook. Just search for The Archive Lady. And here's my email address. Please email me with any questions about my presentation or researching in archives, records preservation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Esther for any questions we may have.
Okay, here, let's see. There we go. What a fantastic presentation, and so many amazing comments here about, tips and tools that everyone has learned here in the presentation. For those of you who came in the middle, since I see that there were a couple of you that were only able to join halfway, you can rewatch today's session by going to the MyHeritage Facebook page and going to the videos section. So there you'll see the complete video afterwards, and you can rewatch today's session, take notes, and for anything that you may have missed. So Melissa, we do have a few questions, if that's okay. We'll take a few.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So let's see. The first question is from Cindy, and she asks, after all these years, I have not used tax records. Where are the best places to look for tax records?
Normally, and I'm talking from a United States standpoint, normally if you go to the county where they lived within the state, the county, they have a tax assessor. And so that tax assessor is that's their job, is to assess the taxes and to collect taxes. And so I would go to the courthouse or any of the county government seats and ask around, find out where the tax records are located. The older ones may have already been transferred to a county archive or maybe even transferred to the state archive if they don't have a place locally. But start with your county government. Believe me, we always have to pay our taxes, and so they keep those records.
Okay, great. We have a question here from Mark. How can you research a part of the world that is in conflict, such as Belarus?
Oh, yes. We are really thinking about Ukraine right now because of what's going on over there. And as an archivist, I've been reading a lot about the archivist over there trying to preserve and protect those records. You think about if you're going through that and that all that, it's difficult. Hopefully those records will be preserved. And in the past, I know that with other wars and other things that have happened in our world, there have been people there, thankfully, that have been there to protect the records, to move them to safety. And so when you're doing research in a place where there has been conflict or wars or destruction like that, sometimes it can be difficult because maybe the records do get destroyed. But keep looking in churches, keep looking in county or in government facilities. A lot of times maybe they don't have an archive, but they do have the records. It's just finding them. Keep asking until you do find them.
Okay, we have a question here from Carolyn. She asks, where do you find school records? Not school tax records, but things like the permanent file that they always threatened us with.
I like that. It depends. It all depends on where they're being stored. I would start with the school board. They may. One thing I always tell genealogists about school boards or county or courthouses, those offices that are doing business of today. A lot of times they don't seem to have time for us, or maybe they don't know where the records are. So they'll just say, "Well, I don't know where the records are. They've been thrown away." Don't take that as an answer. Keep digging, because a lot of times those clerks are just trying to do their daily work. But school records that can be at the school board still, or if they survive, they may have been transferred to a local archive. Maybe they've been given to the local historical or genealogical society. The main transcripts, is I think what they're talking about, are usually with the school board. But all these other extra school records, like school board minute books, a lot of times they're still at the school board, or they could have been given to a local archive or historical society.
Okay. Stephen asks, how do you preserve your scrapbooks? And I know we've had entire Facebook lives about this, but I guess on one foot, if you can give a little advice about that.
Sure. People think that archiving things is difficult, and some things can be. But really, scrapbooks are really one of the easiest things to archive. What you need to do is this is how I do a scrapbook. I get archival tissue paper, and then I interweave that archival tissue paper in between each page of the scrapbook. And then I lightly wrap the scrapbook in archival tissue paper, place it in an archival box. If it's moving around in the box, just crumple up some more tissue paper and put it around it so it doesn't move. And then you're ready to store it. The most important part of archiving anything is how it's stored. So you need to store it in a cool, dark, dry place because temperature and humidity is what's going to destroy your records. If you ever been to an archive or a library and you got to take that jacket with you because it's so cold in there, that's why it's cold in there because we keep our temperatures low so that the paper deterioration slows down.
Okay. Two similar questions here. One from Diane. What's the difference between manuscript collection and vertical files? Which is similar to Gail's question. She asks, loose records aren't put in vertical files or manuscript collections. What differentiates them from each other?
The difference between a vertical file and a manuscript collection, which I did a whole article on my blog about that. Vertical files are individual documents that don't amount to very many. Usually it's one or two pieces of paper, and it gets put in a file folder and gets put in a filing cabinet. A manuscript collection, once you get a collection that's donated that has lots of records, I'm talking about files and files, boxes and boxes of records that won't fit in one file folder in a filing cabinet, we turn that into a manuscript collection. And so that could include old letters, it could include a scrapbook, a diary, a family Bible, a quilt. And so you get the idea that you can't really fit that into a filing cabinet. So we make that into a manuscript collection, which could be multiple boxes of records and memorabilia. And you're talking about loose records. Vertical files is a type of a loose record collection. We would consider that a loose record. And manuscript collections themselves are considered loose records. The reason we say loose records is because they're not in a bound book. You go to and look for the last will and testament of an ancestor. Usually those are in bound volumes or bound books. But their actual probate case, all of the work that was done after the last will and testament was put into the book, you have your affidavit, you have your witness statements, you have heirs contesting the will in the probate case, you have the inventory, you have the sale of the inventory. All of those records would be in what are called loose probate packets.
Okay. Oh, I see a nice comment here from Merlin, who just wrote, I just added 537 people to my family tree on my heritage.
Right,
Fantastic.
fantastic.
And
Yeah.
yeah, nice to see your tree growing over there, Merlin. Amazing. Was it through discoveries? We'd love to hear how you were able to add so many people. That's fantastic. So now we have the pleasure of giving away a MyHeritage DNA kit to one lucky winner, a viewer in our audience. We received so many fantastic comments showing that really, with a little bit of persistence and research on MyHeritage, there really is no such thing as a boring ancestor. And definitely thanks to this presentation, I think that's been proven to all of us. So thank you everyone who wrote in and left us some wonderful comments. And our prize goes to Todd Copeland. And Todd wrote to us and he said, I learned that one of my ancestors was a runaway servant in Pennsylvania in the 1760s. There was a reward offered for his return. The story was written up in the Pennsylvania Gazette, and we believe he was placed in indentureship after the death of his father to learn a trade. What an interesting story. So, Todd, congratulations on your win of a MyHeritage DNA kit, and we will message you to claim your prize. And really, what an interesting story, and so many things that you can really uncover about your ancestors in all the different ways that you can research. And especially, I think we all got got a lot of new directions to take today from this session. So thank you so much, Melissa.
Oh, thank you. And the most important thing is to tell your ancestor story. They all deserve to have their story told. Merlin, who said that they added 537 people over the weekend. I added 10. It's not 537, but I added 10 to my heritage tree. So from using the hints and things that are there, my heritage has been fantastic for my research too.
Oh, so glad to hear. We love hearing stories like that. I think that's what keeps all of us going here at My Heritage. So thank you to everyone who shared your story. And hopefully, you'll win at the next draw at our next Facebook Live. So Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today with a wonderful presentation. And I know that it will be rewatched many, many times by all of our viewers here. And have a great day, everyone.